So welcome everyone. I'm so glad that this time around we get to learn and get to know the NAGPRA implementation world of Emily Dayhoff. And Emily will introduce herself in greater detail, but let me just say it's wonderful to be able to see how Emily implements NAGPRA in a national park context. So that's a new and important part of thinking about early career professionals, particularly Indigenous professionals who are doing NAGPRA. Being in a national park context is very unique. So, Halito Chimichukma Chatasia Chichalagi, my name is Morgan Vélez Young, and I'm coming today from Hochunk land. And Emily, could you introduce yourself in the best way for you to kind of bring students into you and your world?
Yeah. Hey, Yoko Machixasus. My name is Emily. I work for the National Park Service. I've also dealt with NAGPRA on my tribal side within my tribal community, the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation, which is an unrecognized group in California. So I've kind of dealt with it on both ends. So the government side of things and then on the tribal side of things.
Thank you.
The big thing that I've mostly dealt with like day to day is just our backlog of stuff. We haven't really had like a dedicated person dealing with NAGPRA. And so like what I've uncovered in these last few months is that things started a really long time ago and then they just stopped because they lost momentum, the person moved on, they found other things. So then we're adding more and more to it. So I think that's like the biggest holdup is like maybe it wasn't a complete inventory or the inventory was done so long ago that the new projects, everything that happened after 1990 just has been all sitting on a shelf, or they dealt with one half of the inventory and not necessarily all of it. And so figuring out where people left off in the process to then figure out where we're at today in 2026. The hard part is I guess with the turnover of tribal governments, especially now, where I'm at, a lot of the people who built the momentum and built the relationships really early on, um, are all elders or they have passed away. And so they're trying to pass. So there's this knowledge gap where um, elders who have been involved for so long have had health issues or they're just tired and want to retire and the enjoy
Mhm.
not working. Um, and so you're having this new group of people coming in who maybe don't necessarily know the dynamics within the park or know the dynamics even within their own tribe or tribal government of how things are done or just the capacity building in general. I see it on both sides where I see groups who are federally recognized and they have certain funding. But because they are pulled in so many different directions, like we are one entity asking for help. And especially now and in the state of California, where a lot of universities reported things that they have of theirs, they're dealing with that on top of ours, on top of other federal agencies, on top of state governments, on top of county and all of that. So the capacity isn't there. And this one person is pulled in seven different directions. And not to say that they don't want to be involved, it's just it's one of them. And so figuring out how to be mindful of their time, of their capacity, of their knowledge base too, because they could be fresh out of college. Maybe they went to college, came back and wanted to help their community. Maybe they didn't do that and they just moved back and needed a job and that's what their community gave them. And so it's a huge learning curve for a lot of people. And so it's figuring out how to meet people where they're at, but supporting them and not taking advantage of silence isn't a no. And figuring out how to get an answer. Like just because you don't hear silence doesn't mean it's not a no. It could mean a no, but you actually have to ask them. From our perspective, when we had a few, um, I, I guess collections that came from, I guess collections is the word, collections that came from both state and state and University of California schools that there was part of it was like the federal repository. They had to report on federal holdings that they had. So anything that maybe archaeologists or researchers had pulled from national park lands had to be then turned back over to um, the 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 park. And this happened all over the place, like places out of California that maybe were at UCLA or Berkeley, and they pulled stuff from the middle of the Dakotas or the
Oh,
Southwest or anything. So all those parks were dealing with it. So it's not something new. Um, and then the big thing that we ran into, or at least one of the things we ran into, is one of the schools wanted to. They're like, oh well, we're working with these tribes that want the stuff, want the stuff from the park, and they were like, we're like, well, wait a minute, like this stuff was found within the park, like we still need it, and if we've determined that it's NAGPRA related, then we'll go through our own consultation. Like we don't want to just randomly give something to this tribe that we don't know if it's one of our associated. If it was great, but they didn't disclose that. And so then once we take control of that, we notify our tribes that we've taken control of a collection from a university, and then determine if there are NAGPRA things related. Ask them to look over inventories too if we're unsure or what they want to do with it, and then move forward with that. I remember talking to the museum curator and I was like, why are there so many rocks? And she's like, and I was like, who would want to carry this out of what, like the backcountry or any of that? She's like, interns would carry this stuff out. And I was like, that's kind of hard because I was an intern, and I was like, I wouldn't, that's a terrible job. Like these giant mortars, these giant pestles, and it, to me, and I say this all the time to staff that I work with, is when you pick something up or take it out, it removes us from the landscape. And regardless of whether or not that was the intention, that's exactly what happened. And seeing the volume of things of like, oh well, if I don't take this, someone else will. And it's like, I'm going to tell you right now, like the average person probably isn't going to carry a big old pestle in their backpack out of the backcountry for no good reason. If the car's not nearby, I doubt someone's going to take it. And so it's just this ideological shift of, oh, I need it, I need to see it. And I doubt anybody's ever looked at it since it's been in the museum as well. Super cool to see as an Indigenous person of like where things were. And it's like, oh, that's where that came from. And that's one of my big motivators is when I go backpacking is I like to see where my ancestors went through. And it's like, wow, like this is like, again, they still wouldn't carry things. They used what they had around them. Um, and I think the one big disheartening thing as I've been dealing with NAGPRA collections is that, especially from the early 2000s and late 90s, they're still on a shelf. And to me, that's disrespectful. And all of that stuff is still disrespectful. And I remember going to one university to pick up collections and like, oh, this is where all the ancestors are. And I was like, how big of a room do you need? Because that's the way that people thought of to remove people, is to put them in a box and put them on a shelf for science. And what other people are researched for science. And but nobody, regardless of race, religion, or identity, should be ever on a shelf for science left in a museum. Um, I'll talk about my first NAGPRA experience ever. So I had just joined my tribal council. This was like in 2018, and they threw me on a NAGPRA case with BLM and UC Davis from like 2009. It was 2018, and we went up with the Tuolumne Band of Miwok, and I was with an elder, and she like asked me point blank, like she's like, "What are your thoughts on teeth?" And I was like, oh, like, I was like, I don't know. I was like, what do you guys normally do? And she's like, well, sometimes it's really cool to like, if they do the data analysis, like you can see what they've eaten or like the wear on it. And like, she's like, so like that's like, if you want that information, like we can totally do that. And I was like, okay. She's like, but they've kind of mishandled this. So we're going to see what they ask for and we'll see what happens. And I was like, okay. I was like, I defer to you. I was like, this is the first time I'm doing something. I'm here to learn. Like, um, so we're sitting in this meeting and they were talking about these little tiny like Avella shell beads. Like they were minuscule. And I've never seen anything like it before. And we got to see them later. And they're like, oh, but we really want these for science. Like if we can like keep these out, like we would really like these for science. And I was like, that's interesting. And then she's like, no, like you guys mishandled this. Like maybe if you would have like gone through the proper channels, notified us appropriately, like then we'd talk about it. But no, those are gonna go back. And I was like, oh dang, okay, this is what we're doing. And it was probably like the first time I had seen like tribal members speak up and push back on no, this is what we're doing, this is what we want versus like the university being like no, this is what we're doing. And I remember walking out of that meeting and there was a rainbow above us and she's like we did good today because our ancestors are smiling down at us and looking at us. And I was like oh. And so like I've always carried that with me, like whenever I've gone into something or I've gone and like found a collection or like sorted through it and brought somebody home, like I always pay attention to like the surroundings around me of like, okay, they're watching me, they're protecting me as I'm doing this. And that being said, I also always carry smudge with me wherever I go just to protect me because they weren't meant to be moved. And that's their safe way of being home. And I even with my one of my fellow coworkers, she was like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, um, I'm pregnant. Like it's not gonna bother anything. Like everything will be fine." And I was like, "No, we're gonna like." I was like, "I'm fine. Like we're not gonna move anything. Like we're just moving stuff in boxes." Because she was always very considerate of my feelings of like looking at bones and everything, and so she would always do it because she was non-native but would
Yeah.
have me there. But then as soon as she said that, I was like, no, like I'm fine. Like we're just moving boxes. Like I got it. We're both gonna smudge. Like we're just gonna protect that little one that's inside you. So nothing happens. And um making sure that you have the red cloth and everything available that you need. I also carried when I transported um an ancestor back. I made sure I had my medicine bag and all of that with us in the car. Um, and made sure like it sat next to us versus like way in the back that we didn't have eyes on it. Um, because it's that idea of um, you're bringing someone home and you're making sure that they're properly cared for than
Yeah.
sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
As much as I really like the new regulations in that it doesn't allow um, agencies and institutions to claim unidentified, like culturally unidentifiable, like everybody's identifiable. Regardless of whether or not you know which tribe they came from. They came from some tribe, like um where you pick them up. And so I think I really appreciate that as a way to um discourage that. And so now you're finding a lot of institutions and agencies having to go back and be like, oh, well, we mark these as culturally unidentifiable, but now we got to define them. And it's like, well, they were always defined. You just chose not to define it. Or you did define it in some letter, but then you opted to exclude it from the original inventory because you could. Um, I think that being said, I don't appreciate like how hard it is for unrecognized tribes to make claims on um, under the new regulations because before they could do that as part of like the associated group or um, I forget the way that they worded it. It's not called an associated group. Um, it's similar to how like Native Hawaiian organizations can, and Alaska Native corporations can, but there was a way for unrecognized groups to do that. And then with the state of California, you have NAGPRA, where they have to now, they could just lay a claim before, but now they have to do these joint claims. So they have to find some federally recognized tribe to work with to help them lay claim for ancestors that the other federally recognized tribe may not be nearby to. And so, but in order to deal with the federal government, that's what has to be done. Um, and it contradicts CalNAGPRA quite a bit. So it used to be a lot more cut and dry, and now it's not. With this running into, and especially as California has a lot of unrecognized tribes, um, they have to have some sort of a backing, some sort of a support system to get through the federal system. Unfortunately, again, and luckily, like some places, they do work with their unrecognized tribes on the same equal footing as federally recognized tribes. Um, so they still have that relationship within the park. But on paper and through the systems, we still need that proof, instead of just being like, oh, yeah, you claimed it. And so I remember we were waiting for one for a really long time of like, hey, we got this claim. We know it's theirs, but they're unrecognized. Can we get one of you to do a joint claim with them? We even told the unrecognized tribe, like, you got to ask somebody to help you. Like, we can ask, but it also should come from you too. And then luckily everything started moving once we had those conversations.
Mhm. Thank you. That's a great picture of partnerships, relationship with the
Mm-hmm.
communication. I mean, you just share like the overlapping simultaneous efforts that need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had even found like old documentation um, in the park that said that all the tribes worked together on all NAGPRA things. But it was so dated and so vague that our regional office came back and was like, no, this doesn't work. And so we're like, okay, so like, but is it worth updating? Like, and so we had those conversations. Like, hopefully, eventually, like, there could be some sort of an agreement that it doesn't matter which claims we receive, we have something that we can pull that allows the unrecognized tribes to do it a little bit easier.
Yeah,
Um,
great idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is just resiliency, like how much, like I think I spoke to it a little earlier about like how much was actually pulled from some archaeologists out of the ground. And you're just like, why? Like, why did you need all these flakes? Like, you made some intern count all of these flakes or carry this big heavy rock. Um, and seeing like having the resilience to work with that. I also think back to, if things aren't well documented and you don't know where things are, and you open up a random drawer and you're like, oh, this is box 1 of 4. Where are the other 3 boxes? And this one happens to be NAGPRA. Like, what? Like, preparing yourself for those surprises. Hopefully, because then the terrifying part was we didn't know where these other 3 boxes were. So then we went drawer by drawer, and I was like, what if we find more? Like, what if we find more that's not?
Yeah, like prep your nervous system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the curator was like, well, I hope that doesn't happen, but it might. And I was like, okay. Um, and that was probably the biggest thing. And then the way that I approached NAGPRA professionally was I'd rather be more inclusive than exclusive. I remember being handed inventories that were developed in, I think one was in the 80s, and it was very small. As I started looking like out of everything that was like collected, I was like, oh, you literally just pulled things that were from burials. But rodents move things. There's things that get moved all the time from water, weather, whatever. And adding more to the inventory to then have tribes come back and tell you if that's appropriate or not. Like and especially if you know that a site's been mishandled or a NAGPRA case has been mishandled, or NAGPRA collection been mishandled, being more inclusive than exclusive and blowing up that inventory to where you think like, oh yeah, let's add all these beads, let's add all these shells, let's add all these pendants, let's add all this pigment, because to me as an indigenous person, I know what is part of certain ceremonies and what um, people would have used and still use. And so blowing it up to make it bigger, like sure, it might create more work, but it's better to be more inclusive than exclusive. Um, I guess one thing I should have said in my introduction is I am an alum of Johns Hopkins University and did their NAGPRA course. And I remember one of our first assignments was to look at a museum and see what was NAGPRA and what wasn't. And I work in a museum all day, usually, and I'm surrounded by these big, beautiful baskets that my ancestors made. And um, I remember saying, oh, none of them. Like they were made for sale. Like all these baskets on display were purposely made for sale by Native women as a way of living, and as part of a contest to promote tourism within the park. And I was like, none of them. I was like, because they were made specifically for sale. And I remember one of the comments back, she was like, really? None of them? Like you wouldn't put any of them back? And I was like, this museum exists partially because the tribes want to display their art. And for a long time, baskets weren't considered art on the scale of world art. And I was like, no, and we went back and forth a little bit, and I was like, in the discussion, and I was like, I can see the argument, and I can see the argument all over the place. But it does make me think that, if there's broken ones, and then because I reflected then back on this basket care workshop I took with some of our tribal members, and the curator at the time brought out a broken one, and it was smashed in half, and they wanted to construct something that made it whole again, like made it in its complete shape. And the tribal member sitting next to me was like, but do we know why it was broken? If it was broken, maybe it shouldn't be, maybe it was broken for a reason. Um, and so like then that got me thinking again, like reflecting on that conversation, because then it got brought up again in our NAGPRA conversations that we just had. And I was like, and I brought it up to the new curator because she wasn't there for that. And I was like, this basket may have been broken for a reason. I was like, and it was found in a rock shelter and like all these things. So like the big identifying features of it, I was like, we can say it was broken for storage. I was like, all we want. But from a tribal perspective, this probably wasn't broken just because. And like doesn't mean it should ever be displayed, but maybe also doesn't mean we should have it either. And so you can have these big, beautiful works of art that take years to make, but there are some that shouldn't be taken back. And so that kind of got me rethinking about the collection a little bit, like being more mindful of what we put on display, because a lot of what's on display is visible storage because they don't fit on the shelf because they're so big. But at the same time, maybe there are some that the family, someone who's been in a cradle of that cradle and that sort of thing. So there are certain things that we know as Native people that tie people to these baskets, and whether that means um, them going back to the tribe eventually, so the tribe has the discretion of what to do with them, or have their own cultural center, um, or it goes back in the ground in some capacity. But yeah, it was very interesting, like the flip I had by the end of my NAGPRA course that I took.
Yeah, your story really shows the complexity of how is analysis happening in
Mm-hmm.
analyzing, is this something to repatriate or is this not? Is this something to display or is it not? is this something to consult nonetheless with tribal government officials so that we
Yeah.
can get needed insights and information? Like the analysis process is complex and
Yeah.
and it should be, right?
Hmm.
Why would it not be? Yeah.
Yeah. And, if it was consulted on in the 70s and the 80s, maybe it's time to reopen a conversation. Um, like we can't go off of that anymore because maybe those people aren't around anymore.
New insights could have bubbled up,
Yeah.
so.
So I think the biggest thing for me is it's also okay if you don't know. And I was taught that as an interpreter, and I feel like a lot of people don't hear that very often. But just because you don't know doesn't mean you don't know somebody that would know the answer to. Just like when I reached out to you about the new NAGPRA regulations, like how to understand what happened and what changed. Because looking at the video and the webinar on it, it just goes comment by comment, and I'm like, this like we received 276 comments. Like this isn't helpful. like like can you just tell me what's different?
Mhm. That's so fun.
um
Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful statement around it's okay to not know because asking questions means you're in relationship with somebody. It
yeah.
means that you're humble and
Hmm.
as you should be with knowledge development. It's actually it's a big powerful statement to be someone who asks questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for leaving us with that one. That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.